Okay, so I see it is a couple minutes past the hour. We will go ahead and get started. And just to answer the question that came in through the chat, yes, this is being recorded and you will have access to this recording after. Okay, so let's go ahead and get started. Good afternoon. I want to begin by thanking everyone who has joined us today. We recognize how busy life is and really appreciate you taking the time to attend this webinar. My name is Cassidy. I'm a licensed clinical social worker in the Department of Psychiatry and Behavioral Sciences here at Stanford Children's. Today's webinar is part of our ongoing webinar series for our Parenting Center community. For those of you who are new to our webinar series and joining us for the first time, please check out our website and YouTube channel where you can find all of our past webinars. We'll send an email out following today's webinar with this information as well. Next slide, please. In addition, we want to share some of the other resources that we have available to our community. For those interested in a more personalized resource, we offer parenting consultation classes on a variety of different topics. These classes are offered in a small group format and designed to build on the information provided during our webinars, offering additional education and scientifically based tools to support your child or adolescent. As we are embarking on the summer months, we will be opening registration for our fall group series soon, so please stay tuned on that. We run groups in the fall, winter, and spring. Please join our email list to learn more about our upcoming classes. Next slide, please. Additionally, the Stanford Parenting Center is on social media, so please be sure to follow us on Instagram and Facebook for bite-sized, scientifically based parenting strategies. Next slide, please. So now let me just reiterate a warm welcome to everyone who has joined us today for our webinar, Preparing Individuals with Autism for Encounters with Law Enforcement. We are incredibly fortunate to have Dr. Jessika Hertz and Officer Brian Simmons with us today. They will be bringing attention to how we can better support children and adolescents with autism in having safe interactions with law enforcement. Jessika Hertz is a licensed clinical psychologist and clinical assistant professor within the Division of Child and Adolescent Psychiatry at Stanford. She has been working in the field of autism for the past decade. Her clinical focus is helping youth with autism enhance social communication skills and self-advocacy, manage uncomfortable emotions, and work towards independence. Dr. Hertz is passionate about supporting parents in acquiring tools that help them best support their child's development. Further, Dr. Hertz is interested in the unique experiences and challenges within the intersectionality of autism and marginalized identities. And we'll also have Officer Brian Simmons, who is entering his 6th year within the Redwood City Police Department. He is currently working on patrol and is a field training officer. He has completed the Crisis Intervention Team, the CIT program, that educates and prepares officers to safely respond to mental health crises. Officer Simmons also serves as a peer support in the mental health branch of his department, a role that allows him to be the first line of support for his fellow officers, as well as help connect them with additional support as needed. Officer Simmons is dedicated to mental health awareness and supporting and serving the community. You will spend the first 45 minutes or so on presentations, and then we'll have some time to answer questions after. Please submit your questions through the chat function located at the bottom of the screen. Now I will turn it over to Dr. Hertz and Officer Brian.
Thank you so much, Kyle. So I want to start by just briefly going over the agenda for today. We'll start with welcomes and introductions. We'll talk about why we're here and the increased risk for individuals with autism during these encounters with law enforcement. We'll talk about things and information we think that would be helpful for you all to know. And we'll discuss strategies that can help increase effective interactions with law enforcement. And then lastly, we'll end with resources and Q&A. Next slide, please. All right, so I just want to take a moment to just thank the Stanford Parenting Center for providing this space for education and discussion on this important topic. I also want to thank Officer Simmons for volunteering his time and his willingness to share his knowledge with us all today. Lastly, and arguably most importantly, I want to thank you all for showing up both physically and emotionally to foster increased safety and wellness for our youth with neurodivergent needs. As you may anticipate, this topic is rooted in the heavy realities of our society and can be challenging for our minds and our hearts. We welcome you to prioritize your own well-being by taking breaks and engaging in healing strategies as needed. All right, so what brings us here? So although the research is fairly limited, we are aware that a percentage of individuals with autism spectrum disorder will encounter law enforcement in some capacity in their lifetime. As we will discuss further, these encounters carry risk, and therefore we are here to gain knowledge and practical skills for increasing preparedness of our neurodiverse youth to safely and effectively engage with law enforcement. As caregivers and others that interface with youth, it is particularly important that we prioritize, practice, and plan for these potential interactions. Next slide, please. Over the past decade, there have been various media headlines that highlight interactions between neurodiverse individuals and law enforcement that have resulted in negative outcomes. Sharing these headlines is not an attempt to instill fear or to overgeneralize law enforcement in a negative light, but rather to just bring awareness to the increased risk that is present when there is limited information, training, and understanding prior to encountering these interactions. Ultimately, our goal is to reduce these headlines now and in the future with one critical step: educating caregivers on increasing preparedness for their youth in interactions with authority, specifically law enforcement. Next slide, please. There are several different roles that neurodiverse individuals may be in when they're interfacing with law enforcement. So this could be they witness a crime, maybe they're the victim of a crime or being a suspect of a crime, or when they're experiencing a behavioral or mental health crisis, or simply when they're just out in the community at events. It is critical that our youth on the autism spectrum disorder are equipped with understanding and have skills for effectively navigating each of these potential roles that they might find themselves in. Next slide, please. So what makes our youth who have autism more vulnerable in these sort of situations? As many of you know, individuals on the autism spectrum present with a variety of abilities and differences when compared to individuals that are not on the spectrum. Autism is referred to often as this invisible identity, meaning that we can't just look at someone and know that they have autism. So often, due to the differences in social communication skills and the presence of restricted and repetitive behaviors, individuals on the autism spectrum may be misperceived as non-compliant, odd, combative, or even dangerous to those who are lacking knowledge and understanding of these individuals. Next slide. More specifically, there are common characteristics of individuals on the autism spectrum that increase their vulnerability and potential risk when interacting with law enforcement across three core areas. So social communication, restricted and repetitive patterns of behavior, and sensory processing. When engaging individuals, law enforcement are assessing and using both verbal and nonverbal information to inform their decisions. Although youth on the autism spectrum present with a range of ability levels, both speaking and non-speaking individuals may experience difficulty when they're trying to communicate personal information, internal thoughts and feelings, and responding effectively to questions that are being asked of them by authority. Although individuals with autism may demonstrate more concrete thinking styles, which might make them appear as being sarcastic or not, caring about what's being informed to them. Non-verbally, individuals on the autism spectrum may not respond to social cues in an expected way, and their nonverbal behavior may be misperceived as disinterested or evasive, both of which may impact the response of law enforcement during the interaction. Individuals with autism may also demonstrate stereotypic movements that may be perceived as threatening, or repetitive behaviors that can be seen as erratic and misinterpreted for delusional or drug-induced behaviors. As well, echolalia or echoing verbalizations may be misperceived by law enforcement as mockery. Also, individuals on the autism spectrum have increased sensitivity to external stimuli in their environment, especially those that commonly occur in emergency-based situations, like where there's sirens and lights and increased volumes of people's voices. Their increased sensitivity combined with external stimuli in the environment may lead youth with autism to become overstimulated, which may present as emotional and/or behavioral dysregulation, leading to an increased risk during the interaction. So, given this, what's being done to help mitigate the risk for neurodiverse individuals when encountering law enforcement? Law enforcement entities are now taking proactive steps, including increasing their competence in identifying common characteristics of neurodiverse individuals and how behavioral and mental health challenges may present among the community they serve. They're honing their skills in safety and effectively approaching and de-escalating individuals in the community. They're collecting relevant data on individuals in the community they serve to better inform their approach. And they're increasing opportunities for individuals in the community to connect with local law enforcement to foster understanding and connection between neurodiverse individuals and their families and law enforcement that they may come in contact with. And this is important both ways. We want kids who are neurodiverse to be more comfortable and familiar with interacting with law enforcement, and we want law enforcement to have the opportunity to have more exposure to neurodiverse youth. Certainly, there are continued challenges despite these proactive strategies, including that law enforcement may not have access to relevant personal information, including diagnosis, language abilities, behavioral challenges, and et cetera, prior to actually interacting with the individual. So now I will turn it over to Brian. Next slide, please, to Officer Simmons to go over some information that would be helpful for you all to know.
Before I say anything, I just want to thank you guys for being present today and for just allowing a conversation like this to happen. A special thank you to Dr. Hertz as well for allowing me to be a part of this discussion. As I was putting together the things that I wanted to speak about today and just discussing the things that were pertinent, a lot of the things that I wanted to touch on are things that Dr. Hertz has already spoken about or is going to. But there are three different areas that I wanted to just touch on briefly while I have your time. And one is just going to be the actual call to law enforcement itself, or whether it's 911 or a non-emergency line. I know that in situations where law enforcement is needed to help you deal with a situation with a neurodiverse individual, the tensions may be high, emotions may be high, and there'd be a lot of things that you want to say all at once when you call into us. There are going to be a specific set of questions that the dispatchers are going to ask, and it's going to be very hard at times for you to limit the scope of your answers to what they're specifically asking, but it's very important that as best you can that you do that. And they're doing that because the very specific questions that they're asking you are going to dictate heavily what the law enforcement response is going to be once they actually arrive on scene. They're going to be asking questions such as who is in the house or the location where the incident is occurring at. They're going to ask if there are any weapons present. They're going to ask what that person's familiarity or response to law enforcement may be, just because we have quite a few tools to de-escalate at our hands, but if our mere presence in that space is going to cause this person more harm than good, then we want to find other resources to help them without physically having to enhance the emotion of the situation. So it's very important that as much as possible, you answer those questions to the best of your ability before the law enforcement personnel ever arrive on scene. Once they do actually arrive on scene, it's really important that wherever you're at, whether it's a care facility, a home, a school, any combination of those, if at all possible, if you could remove yourself from the situation and meet officers outside, that's going to be the preferred approach as far as that's concerned. What that does for the officers is it lets them fully focus on the information that you're giving them, and it lets them really ask what they need to ask without having to worry about their own safety as well as the safety of the person who made the call itself. And one thing a lot of folks don't realize is that when it comes to these sort of calls, one of the main tools that we use to de-escalate the situation is to essentially get the person who's having the mental health crisis in an area where they're by themselves and that no one else is possibly at risk due to what's going on. And the reason we do that is there's been recent legislation that passed within the past 2 years or so, which affects the use of force laws that California officers have to abide by. If you want to look into it, it's what's called 835 APC. And what that penal code does is it fully dictates what law enforcement officers can and can't do as far as use of force is concerned, and what situations that they can use those different types of force in. And one thing we never want to happen is for someone who is trying to call for help, essentially, to do something that would cause force to be used against them. So what I mean by this, one of the newer changes to the 835A is that officers cannot use deadly force against someone who is only a threat to themselves. So a reason why we ask that anyone who's present when this incident is going on remove themselves from the area is so that you don't inadvertently step in between the person, the neurodiverse person, and the police while this interaction is going on, because if by some chance law enforcement perceived that the person was now a threat to you, then force may be used when that may not be the most effective tool to resolve the situation. So in order to avoid that, we try to just have it to where the law enforcement can just deal with the neurodiverse person directly in a calming and de-escalating manner, and hopefully we can get to a helpful resolution. Unfortunately, most officers we have two tools essentially to solve situations like this, and it's either to place someone on a 5150 hold if they meet our criteria, or it's in certain situations to walk away. And one trend you are going to see a lot more of in the upcoming years is that essentially as Dr. Hertz mentioned, there have been quite a few incidents where unfortunately force was used against someone who really just needed help. And in order to stop that trend, essentially, law enforcement, more often than not, if we don't have the appropriate tools at hand to solve the situation, we will advise the family or the caretaker or whoever called us to find somewhere safe to stay, and we will walk away. And the reason for that is at the end of the day, we want to make sure that our presence isn't causing more harm than good. So as far as that's concerned, we definitely try to make sure that we take the best approach when it comes to this sort of situation. So as far as the assessment of risk is concerned, when law enforcement show up on scene, we're looking for things such as, has anyone already been harmed? Our number one goal when we arrive on scene is what's called preservation of life. And that simply means that we want to make sure that everyone who is alive and in good health when we get there stays that way. And if someone needs aid, we get it to them without causing any further harm. So we're looking to see if anyone is already hurt, or if someone may be hurt, how we can mitigate that risk and remove that, whatever's causing the potential risk before it gets to that point. There are going to be a lot of things that Dr. Hertz already mentioned, such as people not responding when they're given cues, when they're asked to, drop what's in your hand, or given specific directions, such as, walk this direction, or step this direction, or whatever the case may be. And the more quote unquote non-compliant someone is, the more aware of their own safety officers may become at times. As far as information that we need once we're actually on scene, it's really going to be situation dependent. But one thing that's going to be consistent amongst all of the situations is that as officers get there and they assess what's going on, they're going to ask you very specific questions, like I mentioned earlier. And it's really important that you just get them the information that they need in the manner that they ask it, because that's really going to dictate what they do as far as the situation is concerned. I don't want to take too much more time going into that because it's a very general response. But I do I do hope that when the question and answer portion comes up, you guys have some very specific questions that I can address as much as possible. Next slide, please. All right, so these are some of the things that I was mentioning earlier. So essentially running away. A lot of times when officers come in contact with a neurodivergent person and we're giving them instructions, or maybe we even just get close to them, as far as any situation is concerned, sometimes our mere presence causes people to want to run, and we understand that. In this situation, one thing we want to prevent is someone running away and causing harm to themselves, or running away and causing harm to someone else once they've escaped the area that they're contained in. So really this is going to come back to the questions that we ask initially. Who is this person a threat to? If they're having a mental health crisis and really the only person that they're a threat to is themselves, a lot of the time, if they run away, as long as they're doing it in a manner where they're not going to harm themselves, we will let them. Because at the end of the day, if that's going to remove them from the situation, if that's going to allow them to work through what they're dealing with and no one is going to be harmed by it, then running away isn't necessarily a bad thing. As far as lack of eye contact is concerned, that is one of the cues that they talk about a lot in the crisis intervention team training. And it is one of the indicators that we tend to look for when someone is going through a mental health crisis. Once officers observe that sort of behavior going on, that is a cue to us to make sure we fully delve into what's going on and don't just assume that someone is under the influence or that someone is drunk or something like that. That's an indicator to us that there may be a mental health aspect to the call that's going on. And if we have enough officers on scene, at that point, someone may take a step back and ask the reporting party more clarifying questions just to figure out what we're exactly dealing with here in this situation. As far as sudden movements are concerned, regardless of the situation that the law enforcement is dealing with, sudden movements aren't necessarily viewed in the best light, but I definitely understand that that's not always preventable. At the end of the day, a lot of folks don't know this, but officers were always trained to look at the hands, because essentially if someone is going to threaten you with an object or whatever the case may be, a lot of the times the hands are going to be the instrument that they use to inflict whatever that harm is. So sudden movements with the hands, especially in the vicinity of weapons that are readily apparent, such as if we're in a kitchen and we're talking and there are kitchen knives, or if we're outside and construction's going on and there's a large pipe or something present. God forbid we're in a residence and there's a firearm in the open. I would hope that that wouldn't be the case and that would have been secured long before it ever got to this point. But as far as that's concerned, sudden movements are definitely something that are going to heighten an officer's situational awareness. And if at all possible, it's something that we want to reduce if possible. And a lack of response to questions, that is a big one. So a lot of folks don't know this, but in order for law enforcement to place someone on a mental health hold, there's a criteria that they have to meet. And our criteria is very different than a mental health clinician or someone else who's a psychologist or a therapist. Essentially, we have to determine if the person is a threat to themselves or anyone else, if they're gravely disabled. And by that, we have to ask them questions, essentially. So if we can't ask them, when's the last time you ate? When's the last time you slept? Do you have any thoughts of hurting yourself or anyone else? Have you taken a shower? Things of that nature. If they can't communicate that to us and we can't get those questions answered, a lot of times, either one, based on the statement of the reporting party, a hold could be granted, or just if they can't answer those questions, we may take that as the person being gravely disabled, and the officer may deem that the person needs to go on a hold in and of just that lack of response. So if at all possible, just making, whether you're a caregiver or a parent, just making sure that a neurodiverse person knows that as best they can, if they can answer just some basic questions, that'll really help us help them as far as the situation is concerned. All right, and next slide. That's all I've got for you.
Thank you, Officer Simmons.
No problem.
All right, so as we've shared, our top priority is going to be in increasing safety and well-being of neurodiverse youth during interactions with law enforcement. In order to maximize this, we really think it's critical for officers to continue to be trained in best practices for working with these groups, and for caregivers or parents to help work with their child on gaining knowledge and practical skills for increasing their safety during these interactions. For the remainder of our time together, we will be providing practical strategies on how to prepare your youth for safer interactions with law enforcement and provide resources that can help you during this process. Next slide. So how do we approach this process? Importantly, one of the core components to learning is just openly discussing a concept or idea. So that's what we really want to do. We want to, from a young age, identify age-appropriate ways to engage youth in conversations about law enforcement. We want to talk about the role of law enforcement and what context that they could expect to potentially interact with law enforcement. We want to talk about how to effectively behave or interact during an interaction with law enforcement. And we want them to know about how their unique abilities or differences might show up during this encounter. Importantly, learning develops over time. So it's never too early to start discussing the topic with your children. Of course, our intention is not to ensue fear of the law enforcement or police officers in their community, but rather to provide education and understanding to increase their safety now and in the future. Age-appropriate learning strategies may include social stories, which are often used in this population for teaching, or books for younger youth or youth with varying abilities. It can also be helpful to just label or call out the officers in the community when you're out and about, and also practice having your youth introduce themselves to law enforcement and interact with them. Youth are also very curious beings, which we love about them, and will likely have a lot of questions. So, it's okay to not know the answer. So give yourself, permission to gather information and come back to the conversation when you feel like you can answer those questions, and just try to be providing factual and helpful information. That's the goal. So next slide, please. So as you may know, thoughtful conversations and answering curious questions is not going to be enough for just, for the amount of learning we need to occur. In order to ensure that we are intentionally increasing the safety and well-being of our youth and interactions with law enforcement, we must provide them with specific information on what to say and what to do during these interactions. Many individuals, both on and not on the autism spectrum, benefit from having scripts that they can practice from outside, that they can practice outside of these anxiety-provoking situations. So if you can think about maybe when you're preparing for a job interview or even a hard conversation with a loved one, a lot of times we kind of come up with a script or something that will allow us to feel comfortable entering that conversation. So this is very similar. As well, there may be behavioral expectations for youth when encountering law enforcement that they might not be commonly exposed to, and that ultimately we're going to explicitly have to provide steps and opportunities to practice. For example, engaging in full body listening, which includes maintaining eye contact or at least looking in the direction of someone who's speaking, displaying a non-defensive body posture. So rather than having your hands in your pocket or your arms crossed, we're going to encourage just kind of your hands at your side. Just demonstrating active listening. So maybe nodding along as you hear what's being instructed to you. Next slide. Furthermore, we can increase safety and well-being of our youth by role-playing age-appropriate potential interactions that we want our youth to be prepared for. So individuals with varying abilities will benefit from having these concepts broken into smaller steps. And they'll also benefit from observing their caregivers model the behaviors that we want them to do. And also, extremely important is just having the opportunity to practice with a trusted adult these different strategies and to receive that immediate feedback. So while they're practicing, you might want to start off with saying something positive that you're noticing they're doing really well. Like, I noticed you were looking at me the whole time I was talking. That's a really good job. Instead of just saying great work or great job, they might not understand what you're referring to. So being very specific with your feedback. And if you notice they're doing something that's not safe, like putting their hands in your pocket, saying, that's something that let's work on next time, is like having your hands out and open so that the officer can see where your hands are. All right, next slide. So you may or may not be there when this encounter happens, but if you are there, you can play a very important role. And I know Officer Simmons has already provided some of the information on how you can support your child, but some other things to think about is you might be triggered by the situation yourself. So it's really important to really have some go-to strategies to remain calm and wise-minded during these interactions. So for you, this might look like taking some deep breaths, or even just reminding yourself, I can handle the situation calmly and thoughtfully. As caregivers, our calm response may increase our youth's calm response. And, it may provide us with an opportunity to use what we know about our youth to assist in de-escalating the situation. As we discussed previously, law enforcement can more effectively approach and engage neurodiverse youth if they are aware of the unique challenges and differences that the individual has. So it can be really helpful to name yourself as the primary caregiver for your youth and disclose personal identifying information, including your youth's name, age, diagnosis, disability status, and any unique challenges that may be present to the officer in a very calm manner. As well, it may be helpful to ask the law enforcement officer how you can assist during the interaction and clearly indicate as their caregiver, you may have some strategies they could use to help your youth de-escalate. All right, so let's go on to the next slide. Thank you. So I think that having those skills and being able to practice with your youth is so important, but I really want to make sure you walk away with additional resources. Next slide, please. Some of the resources available are this Bay Area specific resource, which is actually a county specific resource. The SNAP program, which is the Special Needs Awareness Program, was launched by the Santa Clara Police Department in March of 2022. And essentially what it allows families to do is to upload their personal information into a very confidential and secure site that allows officers and dispatchers to know what might be going on for the person who's calling. This is going to allow officers to really adjust their approach when they arrive to the scene. So, and this does not only apply for those who have developmental disabilities, but it could also apply to people who have physical disabilities, cognitive impairments, and more. So some examples of the SNAP being used in our community is when officers are informed that they're responding to a residence where there might be an individual who's deaf, officers would expect that this individual is not going to comply to verbal commands and therefore would use other resources to communicate. Or if they're informed that they're responding to a home of a person who has a developmental disability who's triggered by lights and sounds, they would then know to deactivate the emergency lights and sirens when they approach. Okay, next, please. So here are some additional resources that you can go to online that cover tips and strategies for parents who are encountering law enforcement or just helpful information. I find that when we're learning, it can be helpful to hear things in different ways or have visual information in addition to auditory information. So here are some additional sites that might be worth checking out. The very last one that says Be Safe, the movie, is actually a movie that's been produced. I think it's in the form of a DVD. So hopefully you can go to the garage and dust off that DVD player, or they may have some of the copies online that don't require the actual disc. But it is a movie that shows how people can interact with the police safely. So if you think your child would benefit more from that way of learning of watching the movie, that is available for purchase. All right, and next slide, please. So I do want to acknowledge that individuals who have historically minoritized identities that are intersecting with autism can be at an even more increased risk for a dangerous encounter. So I've included these links to a variety of resources that are available to BIPOC families. And for those who don't know, BIPOC stands for Black, Indigenous, and People of Color. So there are specific books and websites and things that kind of go over the unique challenges that can occur within that group of people. Next slide, please. Thank you. Further, there are books on racial injustice in police. The book, Mama, Did You Hear the News Today? Actually has an acronym, ALIVE, that is really helpful for kids, especially if you can't remember every step or thing you need to do. The A in ALIVE stands for always use your manners. The L is listen and comply. The I is stay in control of your emotions. The B is visible hands at all times. And the E is explain any movement. So that could also be something that you use. And if you look at the slide, you can see that the ages are pretty young. So you can really start discussing these sort of topics pretty early on. All right, next slide, please. The other thing is that when we're in these situations, it can be really overwhelming. And what we know about the body is when our bodies are flooded with hormones and emotions and things, our cognitive capacity does not always, exceed the emotions that are happening. So we do want to potentially have other resources that are available to youth to, provide that information if they aren't able to think about what they need to say or express that. Or for individuals who are non-speaking, these are a great way of sharing information as well. So there are bracelets available, there's wallet cards, temporary tattoos and apps. There's all kinds of things that can be helpful. The temporary tattoos can be even more helpful if you're going to a place that you know is going to be particularly crowded and there's any risk there. So plenty of resources that you guys can use. Next slide. So for safety tools, the big red box is comes from the National Autism Association, and it's a free toolkit that offers prevention tools. Like you can put chimes in the home. There's chimes for the doors in your home so that you know when they're being opened, just in case you have youth that elope or wander from the home. There's window clings for homes and cars. There's ID bracelets and safety wristbands. So that might be something to look into. The Smart 911 is a program that allows families to register their phone numbers and with personal information, so like any sort of diagnoses or medical conditions, which are then automatically displayed when you actually call 911, which is a really helpful thing to know. And then also when you are calling 911, if it is due to your child having a mental health crisis or behavioral challenges, you would maybe want to ask for a crisis intervention trained officer so that you know that the person arriving on scene has been equipped with the tools to respond to that situation in the best of their abilities. So next slide. Okay. So I wanted to make sure to give you all a chance to ask questions because I know that that's a big part of this process. So I think we have Kyle who will be moderating for us and asking these questions. Thank you.
Yes, thank you so much, Dr. Hertz and Officer Brian. Terrific information. I have gathered a couple questions. The first one, how can caregivers be advocates in their community?
Great, thank you, Kyle. So there's a lot of ways that you guys can create policy change, and we don't always want the burden to be on you. There's other entities and programs that are being put in place to make sure that it's not always on parents, but you can look at what is available in your area. Like programs like SNAP right now are in Santa Clara County, but not necessarily in other counties. So looking at what policies are available and voicing your concerns to local government, state government about programs that you think would help ensure the safety of neurodiverse individuals. You guys do have the unique perspective of being a parent or caregiver or a neurodivergent person yourself. So that's really important to have your voices. Thank you, Kyle.
Yeah, no, thank you. Another question that we got, how can you make youth aware without creating excessive fear?
This is a very important question. So there is a delicate balance. And I would say that, when we equip youth with tools and strategies, that helps empower them. That helps them feel like they can do things to help ensure their own safety. If we only focus on the outcome that could happen, the negative outcomes, that's going to probably produce more fear. So I would say we do want to discuss like why we're going over these things and what can happen, but primarily focusing on the actions that actually can be taken to create that safety, I think is really important.
Okay, thank you.
Mhm.
How early should I introduce this to my child?
Yes. So it's never too early. You would be surprised at how knowledgeable kids are about some of these topics that feel very hard and heavy. And sometimes we think we're protecting them by not bringing it up, but it honestly can sometimes have the opposite effect. The more that youth know, the more education they have, the more power they can have. So I think that it's more about trying to communicate with them this information in a way that makes sense to them when they're so little. Like I said, I'm using like social stories or books. Those can be really effective ways of teaching young children these pretty heavy, hard topics. But they're never too young. And I think as soon as they understand language, whether it's English or other languages, it can be a good time to bring up these topics.
Okay.
Thank you.
Yeah, this one might be good for Officer Brian. What should I tell my young adult child to do when they're stopped by a law enforcement officer or officers?
I'm assuming when they say stop, they mean like a traffic stop of some sort or in public. On a traffic stop, I would say regardless of why they're being stopped, the officer is always going to ask for their license, their registration, and their proof of insurance. I know a lot of folks have put together little packets that they have that have all that information already put together in a bag or in some sort of envelope. And some folks, I know some people are a lot more willing to share information about whether their child is neurodiverse or they have some sort of communication, whether they've had a bad interaction with law enforcement, or whether people are a lot more willing to share information that will give the officer insight into what they're dealing with, essentially. So what information you can provide, whether it's like a breakdown of, hey, this is who I am, this is what you need to know about me for this interaction, and here's the information that you're going to need. A lot of times those packets can be prepared ahead of time, just given to the officer as soon as they approach the window. As Dr. Hertz mentioned, as long as they're keeping their hands visible, that also really helps the situation. As long as emotions are kept in check and they are answering the questions that they're asked, that's probably the best thing that they can do to make sure the interaction is positive going forward, just in a general sense.
Okay, thank you so much. Officer Brian, you had mentioned law code. Could you repeat that for the group?
Absolutely. So the penal code that determines the use of force laws in California for law enforcement officers is what's called 835 subsection A penal code. It's 835 APC, and that breaks down the full use of force laws for law enforcement officers in California.
Thank you so much. And then could you guys speak to what is a 5150 hold?
Brian, you're muted.
As far as law enforcement is concerned, when we get called to a mental health call for service, from our perspective, what a mental health hold is essentially if someone is a danger to themselves or to others, or they're gravely disabled, what will happen is we fill out some paperwork, and I work in San Mateo County. So once we fill out that paperwork, an AMR rig will come down to our location. We'll indicate whether the subject themselves are violent or if they're compliant. That will determine whether the person is put in 4-point restraints or just sat on a gurney. And essentially what we do is we talk to the paramedic, we let them know why we got called out there, what circumstances or what verbiage the person gave us, which made us concerned for their mental health. And then we have to give them a full-on package which says like, this is who I am, this is who they are, this is why we're called to the scene, and this is why we believe they're having a mental health crisis. These are the criteria that they met. And then based on that, they need to be evaluated further. And then what will happen at that point is they will be taken to our local county hospital which in San Mateo County is going to be CHOPE, or the San Mateo County General Hospital. Inside that hospital, there is a mental health facility called PES, where essentially they have licensed psychologists and therapists who are going to essentially assess that person and see if there is any need for additional mental health treatment, and they figure out what they're going to need from there. And that's something that law enforcement does essentially on a daily basis in San Mateo County.
Thank you so much. We had a parent ask, who could I ask at my local police station, MDPD, if they have had crisis intervention training specific to autism?
So at most departments at that size, so a middle-sized department like Mountain View, I'm actually pretty familiar with them. Their training sergeant is going to be the person who coordinates who goes to training and when they go. Unfortunately, when it comes to CIT, there is no state-mandated requirement that I know of as of yet that an officer go. So it's incumbent upon the department itself and the training sergeant to coordinate that. I know there's a really big initiative in San Mateo County to make sure that most, if not all of our officers are CIT certified. So I know at Redwood City, it's our standard practice that within the first full year of you becoming an officer at our department, that you get certified in CIT. So I want to believe about 94, 95% of our entire staff is CIT certified in Redwood City.
Oh, that's great. Okay. Another question, how does law enforcement know that there is information? How does law enforcement know that there is information on a person in SNAP?
So unfortunately, I'm not very familiar with SNAP. That is a Santa Clara specific program. As far as San Mateo County is concerned, we use a CAD system called RIMS. And essentially, every agency in our county, we all share the same system. We all actually go to the same training together, so we share an information log. And how that works is if we've had encounters with a specific household before, or a person, dispatch as well as officers can search by that specific person's name or the location, and they can see the entire history that person has had with the department. And so with that, they can see, how many mental health holds the person had, or how many times they just been evaluated in general for a mental health hold to see if they needed one. And all that information is readily accessible at a click of a button. As far as our county is concerned. So I would assume SNAP works the same way. And a lot of this information is either going to pre-populate or the dispatch is going to give it to the officers while they're en route to the location before they get there.
Great, some good context. Dr. Hertz, this one's probably for you. You mentioned a movie. What is that movie's name?
Yeah, I think it's called B Movie, and you guys will have access to the recording. You can go back to it. But yeah, B Movie. And if you Google like movie for neurodivergent kids with law enforcement, I'm sure it'll pop up. I think it's one of its only kind. So yes, please check that out if you're interested.
Thank you. And just to add to that, so although the PowerPoint slides themselves won't be available through email, you can see the PowerPoint slides through the recording. That was another question. Another good question here. Officer Simmons noted that law enforcement do not want parents or caregivers to be present when they approach the person. What would you recommend when the person is fearful of new people, when they are upset, and the parent or caregiver's presence would help to de-escalate the situation?
It's a good question. So let me clarify that. It's not that we don't want parents or caregivers present, but we physically need them in an area that keeps them safe and keeps them out of harm's way while we're dealing with the individual having the mental health crisis. So for instance, if we walk into a room together and the person having the mental health crisis is sitting at the far end of the room, we absolutely want you with you. We want you with us. We would just like you behind us. That way, if we need additional questions or concerns to be addressed while we're speaking to that person, an officer can stop and address and speak to you while the other officers are still dealing with the person who's having the mental health crisis. So we absolutely want you there because you're going to have exponentially more information about that subject than we are. You're going to know what's going to trigger them and also what will calm them. And that's absolutely what we'd want to know. So we just want those resources there. We just want you out of harm's way while you're helping us with that situation. That's all.
It is actually
Thank
called
you so much for that clarification.
Be Safe, the movie. Be Safe, the movie.
Yes.
And I do want to add to what Officer Simmons said. I think, there's been a lot of families that I've worked with where they've just been going about maybe their daily life, and then maybe their kid has a meltdown because they now have to leave the park and go home, and somebody in the community calls because they see this interaction happening between the child and the parent. So they might be surprised, parents might be surprised when police arrive and they're like, oh, somebody called the police. In these sort of situations, it can be helpful to quickly let them know, hey, this is my child. They're currently having, a meltdown, or they're experiencing dysregulation because we're doing a transition from the park home. I feel safe, they're safe. Feel free to do your evaluation, but I just want to let you know. So there's not always going to be situations where you're calling to get that help. It might be other people in the community calling. And I think quickly relaying some of that information can be really helpful in those situations.
Thank you so much, Dr. Hertz. Another question we have, are officers told to look for the autistic ID bracelets? If so, what features do they look for? I know medical ID bracelets are often not noticed, this parent says.
So the bracelets themselves aren't specifically taught to be looked for, if I'm being completely honest with you. The biggest resource for that CIT training gives you is like the physical cues of the person's behavior and their mannerisms. Officers who have an extensive history dealing with mental health crisis or calls for service in their area, we know to look for the bracelets, but that's not something that's commonly taught, to be honest with you. Probably should be, but it isn't. So, I mean, the best bet in that situation, especially if the person who asked this question is going to be present, is just to give the officers the information at hand that they would need as soon as possible, so that they wouldn't even need to reference the bracelet. That'd be the best practice, if at all possible.
And I think that if you can train or help coach youth in being able to point to the bracelet or pull out some of the wallet cards, those sort of things can be helpful, because it can maybe like draw the attention of the officer to the tools that they're trying to use, if that's something that they'd be capable of doing.
Okay, I see we have a couple more minutes. I'm going to give you a few more questions if that's okay. How should we expect law enforcement to respond to someone who is agitated and not responding to comments to calm down when there is no one else in the room and there's no threat to others?
Well, nowadays, especially if those are the set criteria, law enforcement is going to make sure that you're okay, the caller themselves. Once they establish that, a lot of places have established what's called a disengagement statement. And essentially it will say that we are not giving you specific instructions where to go or what to do, but we're letting you know that as law enforcement, we're going to be leaving. You need to use your best judgment to take care of yourself. And then at that point, law enforcement will remove themselves from the situation. Like I was mentioning earlier, we're moving towards a trend where if someone is having a mental health crisis and no one is in danger, and essentially the house or the area or the room, the business, whatever case it is, can just be emptied out of people, and people can go their separate ways and not have to engage with that person, and they can just regulate themselves and kind of work that process on their own. A lot of times law enforcement is going to walk away, especially if you're telling us that you're okay with that, and that you have somewhere safe to go in the meantime. Essentially our response is just going to be, okay, please be safe and call us back if the situation changes.
Thank you. Dr. Hertz, this one might be good for you. Do you have any visuals caregivers can use?
So visuals that they can use to communicate with the officer or to teach the youth these sort of strategies, I'm guessing, maybe?
It didn't specify, so if you know of any visuals, would be helpful to hear.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a lot of great visuals that are included within these books. They get creative with how they explain these sort of things. So I would first reference the books and social stories that are out there. Other than that, I think it can be really helpful to tie in your child's interest into it, and maybe you work on it together. Taking pictures of them doing the things that you want them to do, like keeping their hands to their side or showing an active listening. Like, it can be helpful to create your own story or your own images of them doing the things so that they can look at themselves doing it and you can talk through it together. But there's no infographic that I would specifically like recommend at this time.
Thank you so much. Officer Brian, do you have any information that this parent can provide their local police department on how to get this conversation started?
So there is a website, or there's an association that I'm sure a lot of the families on this call are familiar with, called NAMI. NAMI is who spearheads a lot of the efforts for mental health awareness in San Mateo County. And I would just say, just reaching out to NAMI and just letting them know, whoever your local jurisdiction is, you'd like to get them more involved in the mental health process, or even CIT training if that's something that you're interested in. In addition to that, you could also call your local department, whether it's your local sheriff's office or department, and just seeing what their initiatives are, because every department is different. But usually a training sergeant or a training lieutenant is going to be the person who is going to be spearheading that effort, whatever that effort looks like in your area.
Okay, thank you so much. We've got a few questions around access to scripts, whether that be like how parents can communicate on the phone what's going on, or provide their child or adolescent when they're interacting with a police officer. Do you know of any scripts available that parents can access?
Yeah, I don't know that there's anything out there that is already kind of created that you could just fill in the blank. But check out some of the links that I think will be going out after this webinar. They might have something like that. But I think just basically using the information that we've talked about in the slide that went over what to say, of hi, and being very direct, like Officer Simmons was saying, is like straight to the point. Hello, I am the primary caregiver of enter name. They are this old, they have this diagnosis, this is what's happening. And this is what we need help with. Or these are the challenges that my child has that might make interacting a little bit more difficult. And then when it comes to like teaching youth what to say, I think again, it's just, hi, my name is this, I need help contacting my mom, or this is my name, my address is my parents' name. So I think that being able to have them name all of those things pretty readily when they're practicing with you, and then having them practice with other like adults in their lives, like their teachers, and then eventually having them practice with local law enforcement during like meet and greets, or just going to the local department and seeing if there's an opportunity to interact with someone there. These can all be really great ways, but I think it's going to be really dependent on your child's abilities and what might be best suited for them.
Thank you so much. I see we are at time. I want to just extend my appreciation. You received a lot of appreciation from parents saying thank you for your thoughtfulness, and thank you for just bringing this topic out into the community. Thank you, Dr. Hertz. Thank you, Dr. Simmons. This presentation will be available through our Stanford Parenting Center, and an email will go out to parents following this webinar. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.